Welcome to Global Money Talk, brought to you by Sampro TV. Greetings to all of our viewers from across the U.S., Korea, and around the world. We're coming to you live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in New York City, the financial capital of America. I'm Remy Blaire, and joining me today to weigh in on the top stories and, of course, the election results is Tai Wong, independent proprietary trader. Tai, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning.
What a night and what a day. I think we're, big elections. We're still counting votes, but before we get to that, and we'll have plenty of time to talk about that today, National Basketball Day, and I'll have to say that James Naismith, who was a Canadian, actually invented the game, and it's become like the world's game. If you look at the Olympics now, how competitive is basketball? I mean, the U.S., barely won, right, with some of our professionals, so really a contribution to the world. And in terms of birthdays, we have Pat Tillman, who's a former NFL All-Pro linebacker who actually volunteered to serve in the military instead of continuing his career after 9/11, and unfortunately he was killed by friendly fire. And then finally, Maria Shriver's birthday. Maria Shriver, a broadcaster, famously Mrs. Arnold Schwarzenegger, but she's actually the scion of a really prominent political family in the United States. Her father, Sergeant Shriver, may have been was the vice presidential candidate in, I believe, 1972 or 1968, which one of the two, and was maybe the most prominent pro-life Democrat that people still remember. So really a great political family that people tend to forget, because she's a newscaster in her own right.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned those birthdays and what today is, because here we are on November 6th, a day after Election Day. I'm sure you're going on fumes with very little sleep last night, but we are seeing quite a market reaction here.
Yes,
so we're seeing the Dow soar by over 1,000 points. It's not every day that you see this type of rally. And even last night, before midnight, we saw Bitcoin hit an all-time record high. So why don't we start out by looking at all the charts this morning? So starting out with the Dow Jones Industrial Average, as I mentioned, we are seeing quite the rally here. And here we are, still up over 1,000 points, up by 1256, and that's nearly 3% on the session. And the NASDAQ is rallying as well this morning. The NASDAQ Composite Index up by nearly 2%. These are some significant levels here. And the S&P 500 is rallying as well this morning, up by about 1.7%. I do very quickly want to take a look at the Russell 2000 because we saw that up by about 6% earlier this morning, even before the market opened. Right now, look at this. We're seeing the Russell 2000 Small Cap Index up by over 100 points, and that is speaking a lot. That is saying a lot. So, election results.
One of the things that, and we'll get into some thoughts, and then I want to go after we made some calls. The Bitcoin one turned out pretty well, but I think part of it is you're looking at, there are two things when you're looking why I think stocks are reacting the way that they are is that what does a second Trump administration mean? It means corporate taxes are, if they're not cut, they're not going to rise, right? You might get a modest cut, but they're not going to rise, and you're going to get the same but probably less regulation. And I think if you're a small business person, those are the two things that you worry about the most, or any business, is taxes and regulation. I mean, there's a big new regulations that come out, and actually Supreme Court decisions, with some of the justices that Trump appointed his first time around, really clamp down on the administrative state. So the market's looking, and companies and stock investors are looking at a much friendlier environment for investors, for venture capitalists going forward. Now, this is just the morning after, the Senate races aren't all called yet, even though the Republicans have gotten firm control of the Senate, and we don't know what the House is like. The House could certainly, be a Democratic, House of Representatives, which would make things a little more difficult in terms of getting what he wants through. Certainly what he doesn't want won't get through, but what he wants is a little bit of a different story. We might not know that till the end of the week, but the markets are really reacting dramatically today. And in terms of the markets, I would say that when we spent a lot of time over the past couple of weeks talking about the betting markets.
Yeah.
I will have to say that the betting markets got this right. I was watching the markets starting around 7:30, 8 o'clock when some of the polls first came out, and they were leading, pretty hard for a Trump victory, which I thought was extremely premature. And even by sort of 10 o'clock at night, before anything had been called, although you could see some of the trends developing, if you wanted to bet on Kamala Harris, you were getting 7-to-1 odds. I'll have to say, I put a little money with 7-to-1 odds on it because I figure you just don't get a 7-to-1 payout. And in recent elections, we have had some late developments that didn't come out, and by about I would say 1:30 the race was practically over when Pennsylvania was finally called. But the prediction markets, the betting markets really got it right this time. So I don't know if it's luck because it's really the first time that they have been this prominent. But we'll have to give them their due.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of important points there. So as you mentioned, we're seeing this relief rally on Wall Street. So we're seeing stocks higher on the session, the major stock averages, and Bitcoin. Even last night around the 7:30 hour, we saw Bitcoin top key all-time highs above 7,500, and that is something we'll keep our eyes on. But as you mentioned, right now we have the Bitcoin chart up, and it is still higher by 7%. So it is below that 7,500 level, but we did clear that all-time high we saw earlier this year in March above the 7,300 level. And I think this really speaks to the expectation in terms of legislation, as you mentioned. So I think this would be a good time to break down the sweeps that we saw. So tell us what happened in terms of that.
Let's, I just want some observations. I mean, certainly, I thought it was going to be a pretty close election. I thought Trump would pull it out, but I really thought he would pull it out with the bare minimum, taking North Carolina, taking Georgia, and and taking Pennsylvania. But it looks like he's going to take all of the swing states, which is, at the end of the day, a pretty big electoral college landslide. And one of the things that I talked about was I really thought that I was getting 3-to-1 odds to take him to win, but lose the popular vote. And I mean, he really turned that one on his head. I didn't see it coming. As it stands right now, and there are probably a few more million votes to go in, as California is still counting, some of the other slow states are counting. But he's won the popular vote. Looks like with margin to spare. As it stands, 71.5 million votes for Trump and about 66.5 million votes for Kamala Harris. The Republicans have not won the popular vote since 2004 when George Bush beat John Kerry. And even with Trump's victory in 2016, he lost the popular vote. Just to give you an idea of the magnitude of I guess the failure, in this case of Vice President Harris. President Biden got 80 million votes in 2020. She's right now at 60, at 66.5. She might eventually get up to 70, but that's, you're getting 12% of people who voted for Biden really probably didn't come out. And one of the smartest things, the pithiest things I heard last night was Kevin O'Leary, famous for Shark Tank. I think people call him Mr. Wonderful. And his comment was, and this was probably around midnight before the picture was really clear, but was clearing. He said, this will be the best night, the best thing to happen to the Democratic Party tonight if they lose. Because just like 2012, when Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan were thrashed by Obama and Biden, it made the Republican Party really do an autopsy, think about what did we do wrong, and that really brought, eventually led to the rise of Donald Trump starting in 2015. Does this make the Democratic Party think, what went wrong? Why did we drop 10 million votes? That's not a small number. That's a pretty big number. And some wags would say maybe you should have let the old man, continue. He might have actually done better. I mean, we'll never really know. But certainly, winning the popular vote by a substantial margin was a pretty big surprise. And you have to even remember when George Bush won in 2000 against Al Gore by the slimmest of margins, he lost the popular vote. So this is this is a big change. And for me, I grew up in the 1980s, the parties are completely switched. I just remember Family Ties, and you're probably not old enough to remember Family Ties. Michael
I've seen
J.
the
Fox,
show.
you've
Yeah,
seen it. Michael
I
J.
know.
Fox, right? Alex P. Keaton, he was the suburban, affluent, well-educated, and that was the Republican Party. And the Democratic Party was the party of the blue-collar worker. That's 100% different. Now, how this will change, is this a permanent change for the Republican Party, or is it, just Trump himself? Hard to say. We will know in the fullness of time, but really, in 40 years, things have turned 180 degrees. Really remarkable. A couple more things. Trump had really, really big coattails in the Senate. Right now, they hold 52 seats, which is certainly a comfortable margin. It looks like they will also get 2 more seats potentially in Pennsylvania and possibly, I think, in Wisconsin. But those are going to come down to probably the last vote. So he had big coattails. He outperformed most of the senators in the states that he won. And for the historians, only one president has had 2 terms separated by a term when he wasn't president. That was Grover Cleveland, and that was over a century ago. I think it was in the 1890s. Now, in terms of, let's take a look. We made some. Actually, one more thing for our Korean viewers. We have our first Korean American senator, Andy Kim, who's a representative, won in New Jersey. That's a big deal. I mean, he could serve for a long time. He's an immigrant, a relatively young man. I think he's only in his 50s. So the first Korean American senator, and I think I would imagine probably pretty excited about that. But let's look at graphic number 1, which is. We made some calls the other day about what I think what will happen to the markets, in the different scenarios. So I had Trump. So I think we're somewhere between Trump and a Trump red sweep. It is unclear, but as of 8:30 a.m. this morning, when I prepared this chart, the S&P 500 at the time was up 2.2%. So we got that one. Bonds with the 10-year, just using the 10-year as a proxy, down almost 4%. So I think that was got that. The dollar index at 2024 highs, up almost 2%. The one that we missed, and this is really interesting, is gold is sharply lower. 2670, maybe down 2.5 or so percent. I'm a little surprised there. I think part of that is the dollar is so strong and yields are so high that's pressuring gold. But gold is in a bull market. We could correct a little bit more, but and gold, I'm probably, I certainly wouldn't sell many longs here, and if we had a deeper correction, I would look to add to the long positions. As I've said many times, I'm not really long enough. Silver, dropped sharply. Again, that I think should rally back with gold. I like that. Palladium and platinum are sharply lower, and palladium has retraced all the gains that it had gained on when Biden suggested to the G7 that they put limitations on the Russian exports of the metal. They're 40% of the palladium market. I think that should turn around because palladium is used primarily in catalytic converters. I think straight EVs are going to have a much tougher time with Trump because the EV mandate that says 50% of your EVs your cars have to be EVs by 2032. That's probably going to get pushed back for a significant amount of time. So I think palladium, is probably a good investment here because with hybrids, you're going to need that for catalytic converters. More gasoline cars or gasoline cars will fade at a slower pace. I think there's value in that. Similarly for platinum, but that may take a little time to play out. What's interesting, obviously, is Elon Musk has been such a huge supporter of Trump and put enough money. I mean, by many estimates, and that's why probably Tesla has had such a tremendous jump so far today. I think probably 10 or 12% the last time I looked. Tesla is probably going to do pretty well. Trump is going to remember who probably put $75 million in into his campaign. It may actually be a fair bit more than that. But a lot of money in his campaign, really energized it. Did that lottery thing, which got a lot of
That's
press.
right.
But Trump really, Elon Musk really helped him, and I think that's why Tesla is up, and some of the other EV makers are going to have a little bit more of a tough time. So great opportunity for palladium, although Trump seems to have this odd proclivity for Vladimir Putin. And so does that mean he's not going to be as tough on Russia? It is unclear, which may be another reason why palladium is low. But overall, I think the outlook in the medium term is better for the PGM. So I like palladium and platinum in this case. I also like gold to continue on its bull market trajectory because Trump is going to probably cut taxes and cut revenue, may spend a bit more. So I think gold will resume its run higher, perhaps back to the 3,000 area. So moving along, what is Trump going to do? Well, certainly one of the things he will do is Powell's term as Fed chair is up in May of 2026. His term as a Fed governor is then actually up till 2028. But it's really hard to see him staying on as a governor if he's no longer Fed chair. Trump has already said, I'm not going to reappoint him, and that's going to be a big change. I mean, you've seen, we've been pretty lucky with Fed chairs. I mean, his reputation's a little besmirched right now, but Alan Greenspan, a pretty good Fed chair. Ben Bernanke steered us through the Great Recession. Janet Yellen, very, very competent, and I think we've been very lucky with Jay Powell. Jay Powell's had a tough run of it. I think he's done a pretty solid job. Who's Trump going to give us? I have no idea. It could be Kevin Warsh, who was a former governor, a Republican, and generally kind of liked by Trump. Trump is an oddball. He doesn't really like hawks. He's a real estate developer in his heart and soul, and they like low interest rates. So really hard to see what he's going to do. And then the other governor whose term is actually up pretty soon is Adriana Kugler, whose term is up. She's finishing somebody's unfinished term, and she's up in January 2026. She's considered to be, we don't know that much about her, but generally she's sort of a little left of center. Interestingly, I believe her thesis advisor at the University of California at Berkeley is Nobel Prize winner George Akerlof, who is the husband of Janet Yellen and is fairly left of center. So it wouldn't surprise me if Adriana Kugler is not a governor come 2026.
Well, Tai, I think you've given us such a good overview of fiscal policy as well as monetary policy, because we do have the Fed Reserve meeting kicking off today, two-day meeting, great announcement coming out tomorrow. And I think, as you mentioned, the price action that we're seeing across the metals, precious metals, even though gold is down today, year to date, it is up by nearly 30%. So I think with everything, politics, geopolitics, as well as what we're seeing across the asset classes, I think, hindsight is 20/20.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of if you're a gold investor or if you're just you just want to go and have some bars and go buy them at Costco, right?
Yes.
There's no reason after the events of the last 24 hours for you to not really want gold, unless you think interest rates are going to end up being much higher. But we're far too early into the process for that. I mean, listen, we're only in not even 2 hours into into the trading session. A lot of things are going to change over the next couple of weeks, certainly in the months to come. I mean, if we get a big rally in stocks, there are a lot of smart folks who say, you know what, take a little profit, reset, let's see what happens. And as you mentioned, we have a Fed meeting starting today. It's going to end tomorrow. Almost everybody thinks that they're going to cut 25 basis points. And as a matter of fact, Nick Timiraos had a piece today, and he didn't say anything unusual. He just said, what is likely to change. So 25 basis points in November. I think likely in December, and then we shall see. Which is, I think what the Fed is going to do. I think it's a smart thing to do.
Well, speaking of the Federal Reserve, another area we're keeping our eyes on is mortgage rates, right?
Yes.
So let's take a look at mortgage rates. They are around 6.6% right now. But of course, we are awaiting the trajectory of the Federal Reserve. And unlike the month of September, where, as you mentioned, going into that meeting, there is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of jitters. But heading into tomorrow, there are expectations of that 25 basis point cut.
Right. Well, that will make the mortgage markets pretty happy. I mean, probably only the two of us geeks are looking at the mortgage markets this
Perhaps,
morning, right?
yeah.
But every Wednesday they have one, and actually the 30-year rate backed up another 8 basis points to 681 from 673. Mortgage applications, unsurprisingly, fell 11% on the week, right? Why would you take a mortgage now when you know the Fed's going to cut, and you'll get some relief, right? But those mortgage applications are down for 6 straight weeks, and the refinancing levels, who's refinancing now, are down to the levels way before the Fed even started talking about cutting. We're down to the March, April levels in terms of refinancing. So I think if we get, a couple of cuts, and the mortgage rates come down, and we get down back to sort of the 6.25, 6.35 region, I think you're going to see a lot of people saying, you know what, we have the house that we want. Let's pull the trigger because we don't know, what's going to happen. Especially if the outlook is a little bit better, given what is likely to be an economically, sort of friendlier administration and potentially Congress.
Yeah, and I think this is a great opportunity to shift our focus on overseas and take a look at China. So now that we know what's happening in terms of the White House as we head into next year, what are the implications for China here?
So, the standing committee of the National People's Congress, but the standing committee of those 7 guys who really run the whole show, and and those 6 guys are all beholden to President Xi. We haven't looked at it in a while, but they have a meeting that ends on the 8th. It ends on Friday, and they'll probably have an announcement, I think, I guess Friday or over the weekend.
Yeah.
And there've been talk that they're gonna, they wanted to see the results of the election before they came out with the stimulus plans that they're going to have. Now, whether or not they're actually going to do that, it makes for a great story. It may well be true. I don't know if they're really going to do that. I think they move at their own pace, and they're not necessarily going to be swayed by what happens overseas. But this is a big deal, right? Trump has threatened some very, very significant tariffs, and so this may make the announcement, their sort of stimulus announcement, bigger than it would have been otherwise. So, what the latest talk out of Beijing is that there's going to be something like a $6 trillion fund that's a swap that's going to allow the provinces to basically swap out their debt that they're holding with bonds that they can give that to the to the national government and take some stuff off their balance sheets, which they desperately need. That's great news. The bad news is, it might be 6 trillion, but they've got the estimates is they have maybe 70 trillion yuan in debt that's sitting on their balance sheets. A lot of it, they're going to be struggling with. So the markets will like it. Is it going to be enough going forward? Remains to be seen. It actually may not be enough. If it's sort of, if I owe 70 trillion yuan of the provinces and you give me relief on, 10% of it, am I going to do much with that? Am I going to, make more loans? I'm probably just going to clean up my balance sheet and not do that very much with it. So it remains to be seen. But certainly before last night, and the Chinese markets closed down 2.5%. I think that is exactly due to the results of the election. They were at highs, at 3-week highs, in terms of looking forward to what the news is going to come out of the standing committee at the end of the week. So the world is really watching it. I was talking to friends last night, and people in China were asking my friends who were sort of China experts, what's going on? And the guy's like, I don't know, it's still 50-50, too soon to tell. So this is really one of those elections that the entire world was watching. And what was interesting, as soon as it was called, all the congratulations start
Yes.
pouring in,
Mhm.
including from Prime Minister Keir Starmer
Yes.
of the UK, who is going to take a little flack for having 100, sort of labor operatives come over and help, door knock in Pennsylvania for Kamala Harris. So I think he very quickly came through and said, we have a special relationship between the United Kingdom and the U.S. and we're looking forward to, to continuing that. It's sort of like, whoops, let's let bygones be bygones.
Yeah, Tai, it was very interesting to hear from world leaders, officials, in terms of who was first to congratulate Trump earlier this morning. And it's also very telling because when we're talking about certain countries, certain nation states, we know that they have a vested interest in making sure that diplomacy and policy is in their favor. But as you mentioned, China, they are the second largest economy in the world, and they have been having plenty of challenges this year, so there are concerns about growth in that country heading forward. So what do you think needs to happen in China? Because we've talked about their issues in terms of employment as well as housing growth going forward. So what do you think we'll get out from China?
I think it's hard to. I think President Xi has a vision in mind. He really wants to draw, it's industrial policy, right? We want sectors that we want to support, and sectors that we want to downgrade, that we don't care so much about. That Europe has had that for a long time. We don't have that, and there have been a lot of people who've said, it would be much smarter if we had a industrial policy and we had, plans that could go out. Decades, instead of this mishmash. We keep getting, there's a Republican and Democrat in the White House, and then in 2016 we get a Republican, then we get a Democrat, then we get a Republican again. It's horribly messy and unplanned. But in some ways, and I always come back to what Ken Fisher said, and as I think about it, I'm really impressed because capitalism finds a way, right? It's some people. There's a great article that has come out in recent years that. If you look at Thanksgiving and what's on your Thanksgiving table, right? It's the turkey, it's the stuffing, it's all these other goodies, and you know what? Nobody planned. There's no central planner who got all that stuff on your table. All that stuff arrived on your table in terms of with pretty good prices because the market made it possible for you to get all those things efficiently. So yeah, the market is messy. The market is short-sighted. People are short-sighted. American CEOs, care more about their stock price than maybe their businesses over the long term. And those things would be great to change. But sometimes let the market decide. Sometimes works better than industrial policy. So back to China, I think the only thing that's going to make them change their minds is when they finally proven to them that what you want to grow exports. The Americans don't want to buy or won't buy, and the Europeans don't want to buy because you're crushing their industries and they have an industrial policy. Maybe over time it's time for a change. Maybe it's as we mentioned before on the show, those 90 million apartments, buy up a big chunk of those and offer it to people at reasonable prices, and then do a little sort of population bribing, I guess would be the way, saying, you know what, if you have 2 children, we're going to give you a cheap apartment. We're going to let you rent it cheap, or we're going to let you buy it cheap, and encourage you, because one of their biggest issues is a population decline. Today, they're 18% of the world's population. If trends continue in the long term, by 2100, they're going to be 6% of the world's population. That's a dramatic change. You cannot grow as an economy if your population is going to drop by 2/3. By 2/3 of where it was before, and certainly they've peaked in terms of population and are going down. So I think there's going to be a lot of in the United States certainly, and in the rest of the world, sort of a rethink of what's going to happen. And the last thing I would say is, and one of the things that does concern me about President Trump is his foreign policy. Probably a little too transactional to be my liking. But if you were China, would you say to him, we'll give you everything you want in the economy, but I want you to step back from Taiwan? The fear is, would Trump take that trade? I have no idea.
Well, one thing is certain, at least today, and we'll have to wait until 2025 to see what unfolds, but like that analogy regarding Thanksgiving, Tai, so thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tai. And that will do it for Global Money Talk live from the New York Stock Exchange. We're so excited to bring you daily coverage here on Sanpro TV. You can check out the show anytime on our YouTube channel by searching Global Money Talk. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back here tomorrow morning. Have a great day.